This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and broadcast on DBTV. Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode. Live streamed on social media.
Hey, business storytellers. Now there is a feedback, and I don't know where it's coming from. Hold on, my friends. This is so weird. What's playing in the back? Oh, I know what's playing in the background. I have Amazon up because we're back on Amazon, my friends, and I had that open in another window. Technology happens, and we figured it out live on air without even blushing or feeling bad or anything. And maybe that is one way to do it to survive in corporate America. So today we're going to be talking to Clement Decrop about, first of all, his book, The Idea Space. We're going to throw that up here while we're talking, and we're going to be talking about how do you make it in corporate America without letting it kill your spirits, kill your, kill your joy in life, so to speak. So let's get him on the show here. Really excited to talk to him. The Idea Space, very interesting book. Check it out on Amazon. And of course, by the way, everything around me you can buy on Amazon in my Amazon store, including this new camera. This is an eye-level camera. So just scan that code in the top there. That goes to my Amazon store. If you want to look in other people's digital eyes, that's the way to do it. Okay, let's get to the author of this awesome book. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Christoph. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and you handled that perfectly. The little intro.
Oh my God, I was like, what is even playing? It's another browser in the background because remember, off air, we checked it out just to make sure everything was working. But it happens. What can you do? Just roll with the punches. So let's start with the book, The Idea Space. Why was that an important topic for you to cover, and what is it about?
Yeah, great question. So the Idea Space is all about it's about giving you the tools that you can use to find yourself in this world, right? The way that we're brought up, we're told to do things a very specific way and follow a very specific path. But a lot of us don't always want to be along that path. For instance, being in corporate America, right? Or corporate wherever you go. And so in order to better understand kind of how to get off that and build your own thing, you just need to have a better understanding of what the world isn't to have a truer understanding of what the world is. And so the book is essentially a study of the science of the first person, right? A study of your mind and how it relates to the universe at large, using the same language and tools that people use in physics, which is mathematics. And through this, we uncover something that I call the veils of illusions, which is when an unknown enters your idea space. For instance, think about living in 1600, right? You don't even know gravity exists, but then Isaac Newton publishes Philosophia Mathematica, and gravity exists, right? It's an unknown that enters your idea space, and a veil of illusion is lifted. And so we uncover 10 or so different veils of illusion that develop a true understanding of the world so that you can see the world for what it is and take it into your own hands.
That's always kind of interesting. Like, how do you do that? How do you take the world into your own hands, right? How do you create what you want to create? And what's kind of interesting to me is there's people so let's maybe go down this road a little bit, just for a couple minutes. There's some people that would argue, well, they have more opportunity to do that, right? Like, I have opportunity to take the world into my own hands, right? Like, I have flexibility, the way I work, how I work, where I work, when I work. I mean, I was literally sitting on the L in my corner office on the L in Chicago because there was hardly anybody else when I got on. Took that to the airport. By the way, if you're ever in Chicago, you have to take the L to the airport, and from the airport, because it's the same amount of time as if you get a limousine or whatever. But how can you create that space for yourself when you don't have the opportunity? How do you create that opportunity, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I think a big part of it is being able to view your thoughts objectively, right? I feel like nowadays that's kind of like a key theme in the book, right? Where when we talk about stars or molecules or whatever we want, we talk about them quite objectively, right? We use math and formulas to describe them. And so one of the key principles of the book was like, all right, what if we use those same principles and talked about the mind? And that's where the concept of an idea space came out, right? So an idea space is a mathematical model for your mind. And your idea space consists of your thoughts, emotions, sensations, perceptions, and the empty set, right? Those 5 elements build your idea space. And your idea space has 2 key properties. The first is that it's uncountable, which means that it's impermanent, it's always changing. And the second is that it has 0 measure, which means it looks like nothing to the outside world. For instance, if I'm holding a pen, clearly you can all see the pen. But then if I close my eyes and I picture the pen in my mind, you can't see the picture of the pen in my mind, right? And that's because your idea space has 0 measure, right? And so in doing so, we're able to create this sort of space of separation like you're talking about, where we're able to view our thoughts objectively and take a step back from the I that constantly dictates the way that we live our lives.
You know what's interesting to me when it comes to what you just described, and so I'm a big believer in systems, right? There is a system really maybe for everything. You just got to figure out what that system is. How does it work? How does it fit together? What are the pieces? And what I just heard you say there is like, it's a system. How do you actually do it? Even though it might be in your mind. And I know there's a lot of people who will argue, oh, I can't. That's just how it is, and well, whatever. But there is a system to everything, right? I mean, how do you? I don't want to say the non-believers, but how do you get the people to understand that when they go, "Oh no, that's just how it is." Like I'm behaving like this. I'm doing this because that's how I learned it as a child. Do you know what I mean? Like they're not evolving with the system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think there are definitely some characteristics that we take on throughout our lives and that we build upon. But who you were yesterday doesn't dictate who you are tomorrow specifically, right? You always have the opportunity or choice points in your lives to make a decision that would be different than what your previous self would do. And I think a good example of this is just the foundational concept of science, right? Like, what is science? So, science may be best known through like the familiar scientific method, where you have an idea and you test, it's a hypothesis, right? And to see whether it's true or not, you test the hypothesis. And through various testing, you can either have 2 options. The first is that you reject your hypothesis, which means it was wrong. So, for example, if I thought the sky was red and I looked up and I tested it, I was like, all right, it's clearly not red. And then the other outcome is that you fail to reject your hypothesis, which means there's not enough data to come up with a conclusion that says otherwise. And if your hypothesis stands testing from various different angles, then it's deemed a natural law. And the curious thing about science is that it's always changing. So, for instance, back in the day, there was something called the law of attraction, right? 2 things are always attracted to each other. But then Isaac Newton came in and was like, no, that's a concept called gravity. And so this concept of gravity overshadowed the law of attraction. And in more recent history, Albert Einstein released general relativity in 1915, and the concept of general relativity kind of overshadowed the concept of gravity, right? Because gravity is simply an illusion caused by the curvature of space-time. And so in a similar way to how science can evolve and how back in the day people were like, oh, the law of attraction, that's 100% a thing. That's what the science says, right? Well, the truth of the matter is that the science is always evolving, right? And it's really just a really strong approximation for us to understand how the world works at a moment in time. And so while general relativity holds true today, there may be in a future where it's not as true, right? So when we look at Newton's forces, they're still very practical, right? It helps us drive our car. It helps us launch rockets to the moon. And it's just one step closer to having a more true understanding of how the world works. So if you ever feel like you're in a rut and you can't change, just know that change is always right around the corner. Every day is new, and you always have an opportunity to create yourself, right? And I know that sounds extremely cheesy, but there's various reasons for why that is, and happy to go into more detail if you're interested.
Yeah, definitely interesting that, what's interesting to me is the world's always changing. And sometimes it's actually a skill to kind of figure out when that change affects you, when it's important for you to think about. I mean, I said something, I don't remember what the exact phrasing was, but there was something I said. I was like, oh, this might be outdated information, what I'm basing this statement on. Oh, you know what? I grew up in Germany and somebody goes to Aldi in the US. And I said, Aldi in the US is not very good. And then I thought, I was like, when was the last time I actually went to Aldi? And it was probably like 15 years ago. Now, has Aldi expanded or changed in the last 15 years? I have no idea, right? But like my knowledge and my opinion today was based on something 15 years ago. So how do people actually stay on top? And even if they don't stay on top, how do they realize, oh, this might be outdated. I better go and check it out on Perplexity AI, what the current thing is.
Yeah, I like your Perplexity AI reference. I actually started using it too, and it's a good substitute for Google. But yeah, I think knowing when to, I think it's always important to just be skeptical, right? That's kind of the foundation of science, is to be a natural skeptic. And there's this good quote by the Buddha, which is, whatever has the nature to arise has the nature to pass away. And that kind of hits on the last topic we were discussing of like, when do you know when something needs to change, right? If your idea around something has arose out of something, then you know that it has the potential to dissipate and evolve into something else. And so I think having that skeptical approach is something that you always need to have on. Um, and it's just a skeptical lens that you view at the world, where you don't take anything for face value, but you actually just test it for yourself to see if it lines up with your reality. Because what may be true for one person may not be true for the other person. For instance, like my favorite color is blue, but someone else's could be red. And both of those things are true at the same time, right? But then there's other instances where it's not as trivial. For instance, if you remember, if you're watching this, there was the dress a couple years back, which was a famous picture of a dress. For some people, it looked black and blue, and for other people, it looked white and gold. But at the end of the day, it was still the same exact dress, right? So who's right? Who's wrong? Well, in this instance, both people are right, but you're looking at the exact same thing, right? So things like this show us that the world is clopin. And this is something I talk about in the book a little bit more detail, but in clopin, it's a mathematical tool to describe when a space is simultaneously open and closed, which may seem contradictory to what we normally deal with, like with doors. But in math and in the world, things are allowed to be clopin, where two simultaneous ideas are simultaneously true, like the dress, where one person sees black and blue and the other person sees white and gold. And so I think understanding this concept of clopin from a deeper perspective allows you to open up your heart to live a more skeptical lifestyle, not in a negative way. Like when I say skeptical, I don't mean like a negative skeptical. I mean more of a, like, life is beautiful, and let's just take every moment as it is sort of way.
What's interesting to me about that stupid dress, to be honest, is I hadn't thought about that dress in a long time. And I'm currently reading Frida McFadden's new book, The Widow's Husband. I would highly recommend if you like any kind of thrillers. This one is more of a satirical thriller or something like that, but highly recommended. Amazon store, scan that code up there if you're not watching on Amazon, and you can check that out. Also, I took the book off. Somebody messaged and said the QR code wasn't working, so I don't know why it wasn't working. That's automated. I don't create it. Maybe Restream is having an issue. Either way, you can find the book at the link below, or you can just go to the Amazon store up there. Or if you are watching on Amazon, just click right below. It looks like people are clicking along. So there's plenty of ways to find it, or you can just Google it. Then I just don't get a commission. I'll survive, my friends. Now, how do we apply all this to corporate America, right? Because corporate America is kind of interesting because there's pockets, maybe it's the majority, and you have like real, like, these are the rules, like, and then you got parts of corporate America, maybe it's mostly startup culture, I don't know, but I seem to see it everywhere, and it's more flexible. It's like, work when you have to work. Like the way I work, I roll out of bed and I go to work because I get a lot of stuff done. before 9 a.m., and then if I want to go to the gym at 11, I'll go to the gym at 11 if I have time, for example. So like, how do you apply what you've been talking about and what's in your book to corporate America?
Yeah, a fantastic question yet again. So the climax of the book is around understanding objective reality versus imagined realities. And so an imagined reality is something Yuval Harari talks about in his book Sapiens, which is something that is real because we believe it to be real. And that's really called like an intersubjective reality. So for instance, the United States government is an intersubjective reality. We believe it's real because all of us believe it's real, right? If one person left, the United States wouldn't collapse, right? And that's kind of what gives it its power as an intersubjective reality. And there's other intersubjective realities in the world, such as money, words, languages. These are only real because we believe them to be real, right? So, for instance, with English, for like languages, let's look at Latin or Sumerian. At one point, those languages didn't exist, then they existed, and now they're considered dead languages, right? So there will come a time in the future where English no longer exists and it becomes a dead language. And that's just a natural cycle of life. And so coming back to corporate America, we have a lot of these companies that are also intersubjective realities. They're only real because we believe them to be real. And that makes them not as real as objective truths, which are things that are definite and have withstood the test of time. For instance, mathematics is an objective reality. What was true in math 10,000 years ago will still be true in math 10,000 years from today. Whereas a corporation like Amazon wasn't here 10,000 years ago, and maybe in 10,000 years, it won't be here as well. And so all of these intersubjective realities go through these cycles. And when you have these corporations that have been around for a long period of time, whether they're governments or just any large institution, they mature. And when they mature, the institution creates these processes and rules that are just timeless. Like you can look at like the Roman times, the Greek times, just different points of civilizations where these large institutions came to be. They all have this weird cycle where it starts from a startup that has like this life to it because it's new, it's fresh. And then over time, it just kind of stales out. Like, for instance, a great example of this is the church. And around 1000 AD was when the rise of the church really came to be, because that's when the Dark Ages came. And around 1500 AD was when the church basically was at its peak. And then it started to go back down once money became the main driving force of human institutions. And all these monarchies were able to take hold and became the nation states that we know today. And these are the main institutions. And so I think a big concept for navigating corporate life is just understanding this fundamental truth that the corporation that you work for is an imagined reality, an intersubjective reality, and not an objective reality. And the key to this is that we spend a lot of time focusing on these intersubjective realities, whether it's money, words, or the company title that you have, right? And we have a lot of validation from this. But the dilemma is that these intersubjective realities are impermanent. They're always changing. And so when you want to hold on to that title, the title is bound to change. And when it changes, you get upset because it's not the thing that you have anymore, the thing that you want anymore. And so a key theme of the book is to instead focus on objective realities, things that will hold true throughout time. And some key objective realities are first and foremost your health, and second, your relationships, right? And it's kind of hard to sometimes separate from that world just because we've been taught so hard growing up that this is kind of the world and the way that it is. And I think a great thing that people can do to help find that separation is to go on a sabbatical, right? For instance, I went on a 2-year sabbatical and it was the best experience of my life. It allowed me to write this book and launch my own company, which was life-changing. And so one of my friends now who lives in Chicago, like we were talking about before, I know you love your Yankees, but he's also taking a 9-week sabbatical to kind of just like figure out what there is more to in life, right? And there's no shame in that. And the key to that is just finding that financial independence first and foremost so that you can take that sabbatical without the added pressure. But once you do that, you'll see how much to life there actually is.
What's interesting to me too is what you're really talking about is like creating opportunity, creating, uh, I don't want to say financial wealth, but like financial independence, at least even like temporarily, right? I mean, there's some couples I've known and they have, they live on, both people have a job and they live on one person's salary or maybe even less. And the other one they just put aside, and every 5 years they take 2 years off, right? And travel the world, and they basically have invested the other person's salary for the last 5 years, and that's what they now use, and then they come back into the workforce. How long that's actually going to work, right? Once they get older and older and older. I know we're not going to accuse anybody here of discrimination, but it could get harder to get a full-time job, right? The older you get, potentially. I'm not the youngest pup in the store here anymore either, but but it's kind of interesting. So you have to create the opportunity to actually figure out how can you be happy, how can you do that as you're moving forward. Super interesting. Interesting. You mentioned the government, believing in the government. We probably don't want to go down that route too
Yeah,
far
that's a
here.
whole beast in
That's
itself.
that's a whole different story. But what's interesting is about if you don't believe in it, like you have to make a change and you have to figure out how to make the change within the system, right? I mean, is that kind of the way to think about it? I mean, even if I want to make change in government, totally totally, totally going to piss some people off here. But the answer is not to riot the U.S. Congress building, in the United States, but it's maybe running for Congress, right, and trying to make real change. So how do people even get started? Let's tie it back a little bit more to business than politics, but how do people even get it started to figure out how they can drive that change right away? Maybe let's talk about that for about 45 seconds, and then we'll wrap it up here.
Yeah, I think a key point is just because the object is an intersubjective reality does not make it bad. So, for instance, we have laws. Laws are good. Laws prevent us from killing one another and have responsibility for our actions. And so I totally agree with you on trying to change the system. And there's a beautiful Michael Pollan quote that captures this perfectly. And he says, "The challenge is to change the system more than it changes you." And so I think ending on that captures the essence of it well.
It's just so interesting, to think about how do you do it, how can you stay happy, and how do you move forward. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Last 20 seconds here. Tell us who should reach out to you, how do they connect, and who do you work with, if anyone.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me at theideaspace.io. The first chapter of the book is free online there, and the bonus chapters are free. But otherwise, Christoph, thank you so much for having me. You are the man, and it's been an absolute pleasure being here.
Thanks for coming on, even with all these technical issues, and we are out.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe